This is Tony Cooper, and I'm just sitting down. So here we go. We're right on time. Listen, today's episode is going to be about PTSD. In the episode where I interviewed Shelby and Nagasa following the release or pre-release of their film, Unsaid, I got some questions regarding post-traumatic stress disorder, which is what PTSD is, and perhaps a little bit of definition for what's included in PTSD, who can have it, and what does it lead to. PTSD is a rather broad category of responses to what can be a physical or psychological element in someone's life. PTSD became most prominent after some of the Middle Eastern wars. Soldiers were coming home and they were despondent. They were unable to basically function on a regular basis. They avoided people, places. They didn't want to go do anything, activities, objects, just, all the regular stuff that you and I may consider normal. And of course, they were reporting things like flashbacks, nightmares, and other memories that they didn't actually even incur, because these are things the mind has this tendency to make shit up, to more or less identify with what is going on. And by identify, I kind of mean this could also happen. Imagine you're going to sleep and you're thinking, well, I have $500 and that's going to go toward these three bills that I have to pay. And then your mind makes up a scenario where there's another bill you have to pay. The refrigerator dies, or your air conditioner goes out, or something like that, and you don't have money to fix it. That's also an involuntary type of thing that is caused by the stresses related to PTSD. So, the Mayo Clinic identifies post-traumatic stress disorder as a mental health condition that can develop after someone experiences or witnesses a traumatic event. Traumatic events can include war, like we just discussed, natural disasters, sexual assault, physical abuse, or bad accidents, among other things. There's lots of finer detail, I'm sure, that you could go into any of those, but it does create quite the emotional recovery, and many do not or have not recovered. We can point to, quite possibly, I'm not going to say this with any authority, but we could point to things like elements of the veterans that we lose every day to suicide. A lot of them are recovering or still having trouble with post-traumatic stress disorder. And this may have been related to their service. It may have been related to something that they came home to, situations that occur during recovery training, reassignment, all those things. They kind of add up, and these are things that get lumped into post-traumatic stress disorder, because it only takes one trauma to have post-traumatic stress disorder. And additional definitions or additional information about PTSD um, include this again from the Mayo Clinic. To meet the criteria for PTSD, a person must have symptoms for longer than a month, and the symptoms must be severe enough to interfere with aspects of daily life. Most people recover from initial symptoms over time, but those who continue to experience problems may be diagnosed with PTSD. What I have experienced with people I've discussed this with is when they know that there's something wrong, it may not necessarily come from something recent. There are some people, let's take physical abuse, for example. Physical abuse is something that can manifest itself over time, and it depends on how long you were abused, most likely. But if imagine a scenario where you're married to this wonderful person and they were amazing while you were dating, and when you got engaged, it was so romantic. And then after you get married, they start ranting about things. They start getting upset about things that don't make any sense to get upset about to you, and physical abuse begins. And it continues until someone changes the circumstances. It's not up to me to determine what those circumstances might be or how the change occurs, because that's going to be individualized by each person. However, in talking with people about this, I have discovered that in one particular case, post-traumatic stress disorder came about in someone who lost their husband. She is older, and he was diagnosed with cancer. Probably, this has been a while. And of course, she was there for him throughout his treatments and his recovery periods, and coming back and eventually taking his life. And in some ways, I was a witness to this from afar. I was part of, as a photographer, I was part of one of the celebrations that they had while he was alive, and I was able to take some pictures, and it was great to share his family and friends. And after he passed away, of course, I kept in touch with his wife, and it was years later. I would say years later, just from my perspective. She may tell it differently, and maybe we'll get to talk about it, but I'm not going to count on that right now. One of the things that I found was that years later, from my perspective, from what I saw, she began to have some emotional problems. And she wasn't the first to admit it, and neither would I be. But it was affecting her more and more, and she started to go see someone about it. And this is when it became more apparent to her what her situation was. Now, she is not the only one that I have ever talked to that has had these kind of flashbacks, these kind of situations, the nightmares and repeated involuntary memories. And sometimes these traumas are so deep in your mind that it is very hard to overcome them. Another case that I'm familiar with is a woman was married to a man. Seems like a pattern here, doesn't it? One was married to a man, and he was verbally abusive, sometimes physically abusive, but more often verbally abusive. And she remarried some years later, and It has taken her decades, literally decades, to get to the point where she understands and more or less appreciates that she's married to someone who is not going to abuse her anymore. At least not verbally, psychologically, physically, in any way. Now, there may be cases where sometimes they don't disagree on or they don't agree on stuff, and that's one element. Sometimes we all have our moments where we are not exactly Mr. and Mrs. Friendly, let's say. But that is also a trauma, and post-traumatic stress disorder doesn't say in any way, shape, or form that you will ever recover. There will always be some nth in there, a doubt perhaps, or a curiosity, or even a suspicion about what is going to happen next. And I think that's one of the most debilitating factors related to post-traumatic stress disorder that so many people don't understand. One of the things that I try to realize for myself, because I speak to so many people about things like this. And remember, I'm not a doctor in any way, shape, or form. I just have access to ChatGPT, Google, all the AI tools, and I look stuff up. And the Mayo Clinic is a great resource for stuff like this. There's other resources, National Institutes of Health, for example. And I realize that regardless of what people do or say related to their struggles with PTSD or any kind of trauma that causes them to respond outside of what you might consider the norm for them, it's always something that lingers. And I think we've all had those kinds of things, and they may not be to the level of PTSD. They may be something that you remember from your childhood. I, for example, remember a dream that I had where I got chased by a goat, and I fell and I hit a fence outside my house where I grew up. And the last thing that I remember from the dream is that the goat was coming to get me. And that's, at the time, of course, that is a small trauma. It doesn't haunt me now. It's not something that's ever haunted me, but it is something that I remember from time to time. And I think that those are consequential. Those are not necessarily related to anything. And I'm not getting into dream interpretation in any way, shape, or form, but I did want to make sure that you understood that PTSD is not necessarily something that is a broad blanket that covers every type of incident or trauma that is related in any way to how you and I deal with our daily lives. So going back to Shelby's interview, the experience of PTSD feels a lot like, for some, now, I am not, have not experienced PTSD, and not in that form, or in any form for that matter. I do not claim to have any type of post-traumatic stress disorder, either mild or heavy, in any way. I am a sympathizer more than I am somebody who has gone through this. And there's lots of other psychological issues that I have experienced and am still experiencing, but PTSD, thankfully, is not one of them. But I did want to get back on here and go kind of through a few things again, as I just did, and hopefully help people understand that post-traumatic stress disorder is debilitating psychologically for the people who have been through it. And my hope for them is peace. And my hope for you and others is to realize just how real this is for them. It's not a weakness. It's in no way a strength. It's not something that indicates that they are weak, that they are faking it. It's something that they need. They don't even need your pity. They don't need your help. They need to be. They need to be better. They need to get better. And they can only do that if they seek help. And if you are someone who can point them in the right direction or point somebody in the right direction to them to help them, do that. But if you're one of the people who pities or shuns or avoids or even laughs at them, grow up, because it's not about you. It's about them. They need the peace and they need the time. And I hope you can see your way clear to give it to them. There are some additional PTSD resources I will put at the end of this video, of this episode. One of the things that you can do if you are suffering from PTSD and you're having it in a moment, and it's leading to something that could be disastrous, and we all know what that means. There is an emergency number very similar to 911. Obviously, if something is really going on and you need immediate medical attention, please call 911. But if you are having a moment and you are thinking about things that you shouldn't, call 988. 988 is a hotline. It is operated by people who know how to help you. They are trained crisis counselors. They can help you in a number of ways. And generally speaking, they can probably help you get back to being yourself a little more, get you some real help, some in-person help. So with that, I'm going to end this one. I think I've driven it in enough that I hope if you're listening and you are having a bad day, call someone. 988. Those are the kinds of people who will answer the phone and immediately know how to help you. You don't have to describe it to yourself. You're going to call and they are going to walk you through it. So call for help. If you don't need help and you just need an ear, you have friends. I can be a friend. I always post my email address, and of course, with the myriad of channels that I have through my podcast, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, where these episodes aren't nearly as long, they're fairly short. It's a big deal for people who have it and need the assistance. So get some help. Everybody else, be kind. Stay tuned. There's more to come. Everybody take care.